Well, Gonzaga jumped out to a 32-4 lead and pretty much led by 30 or more points the rest of the night against Arkansas Pine Bluff on Tuesday. It gave us a great look at Gonzaga's depth, including Jun Seok Yeo and Luka Krajnovic. So, what did we learn?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Folks, we're going to discuss 2024 five-star prospect Isiah Harwell. He had recent comments about his upcoming visit to Gonzaga. What does it mean for Mark Few's team? We're also going to talk about a four-star prospect in the class of 2025 that the Zags extended an offer to. Before we get to all that, though, we're going to talk about this win over Arkansas Pine Bluff on Tuesday evening, the first of three Gonzaga games this season against opponents in the SWAC conference. Ark Pine Bluff coming into the game was, I think, 345th at Ken Palm. They were the second worst defensive team in the country, and Gonzaga made them look like it. 111-71 is the final score here. Again, the Zags jumped out to a 32-4 lead, and from that point on, the game was basically never within even 25 points. It was a complete massacre for Gonzaga in every way, shape, or form. They just dominated this game right out of the chutes. That's what we wanted to see. That's what we needed to see from this Gonzaga team in order for them to be able to play more of the depth. Last week at the same time, we were recording a podcast right here about 8 p.m. on Tuesday after Gonzaga's game against Cal State Bakersfield. And one of the things we talked about was Gonzaga's inability to play, to give Ryan Nembhard a break, to give Nolan Hickman a break, to give Dusty Stromer a break. That was not the case in this game. We'll talk a little bit more about the depth, how Krajnovic did, how Jun Seok Yeo did, who started, by the way, first career start for Jun, started in place of Dusty Stromer in this one. But first, I want to talk about the key performances, the good stuff that we saw here. Massive rebounding advantage for Gonzaga. They ended up out-rebounding the Lions 65-28 in this one. They had 28 total assists, including 17 in the first half, and it was led by the same two guys who have dominated a lot of Gonzaga's games this season, Graham Ike and Braden Huff. Braden Huff, coming off the bench, 19 points, 7 rebounds. He had 3 blocks. He had 12 points on 6 of 6 shooting in the first half. The 19 points led Gonzaga in this game. It was not his career high. He had 21 points against Eastern Oregon earlier this year, but Huff continues to be a prolific scorer coming off the bench for Gonzaga. We still want to see him do it a little bit more consistently against better quality opponents. He was great in that game against USC. I think he had 12 points in that one. So it's not like he's only played well against teams like Arkansas Pine Bluff, like Eastern Oregon, like he did in the Lewis Clark scrimmage game. He didn't play great in Maui. I thought he showed some flashes in Maui. It was his first time playing real competition. It was his first really big road. It was his first road trip at all, in fact, as a player for Gonzaga. So I think it was understandable to see some rustiness, he wasn't quite ready for those games. But then to bounce back and play well against USC, I think is a testament to how quickly of a learner he is, how adaptable he is as a player. We're not going to take a ton out of this game. Again, Ark Pine Bluff basically has nobody over 6'9". A lot of Huff's points were opportunistic, and that's one of the things I really like about him is he has a nose for the basketball. He finds himself in the right spot a lot. And it can look coincidental, especially if you've only watched him play once. You're like, oh, it just seemed like he was in the right spot and just happened to get some easy bunnies at the rim, happened to get some offensive rebounds because the ball bounced his way. But now, we're 7-8 games into the season. It's not a coincidence that it's happening every single game. Like, Braden has a nose for the basketball. He finds his spots. He knows where to be. He knows when to move, how to move, where to get the basketball, where to find his way to get to the rim. He can finish with his left hand. Of course, he can also finish with his right hand. Really impressive stuff from him in the early going this season. And while at this point we're kind of just yawning ho-hum at 19 points against a team like Ark Pine Bluff, it continues to be impressive how good Braden Huff has been in the first month of the Gonzaga basketball season. Graham Ike, monster in this game as well. No surprise there. Once again, we're going to ho-hum Braden Huff, dropping 19. We're probably going to react the same way to Graham Ike, dropping 17 points, 9 boards on 8 of 12 shooting for him. Really fantastic stuff, particularly in the first half. Didn't play much in the second half. Not a lot of the starters played much in the second half, which was a big storyline for this team as well. Before we get to that, Gonzaga, massive scoring advantage in the paint. I actually don't have the final figure in front of me, but I know with about 9 minutes left, Gonzaga had 48 points in the paint, and Ark Pine Bluff, who settled for a whole bunch of three-pointers, they only had 8. Now, I want to talk about benching the starters because I think that was a valuable thing that Gonzaga was able to do. We'll talk a little bit more about Yeo starting over Dusty. There was a lot of conversation about that, particularly in our Discord channel. If you want to join the Discord channel, again, it is free to do so. There's a link in your show notes, free to join. We're talking throughout the Gonzaga basketball game. There's 30, 40 of us or so consistently talking throughout that game. Really fun way to have cool conversations throughout the contest. But Gonzaga needed to give these guys a break. And yeah, their next game is not until Saturday against the University of Washington, Saturday evening in Seattle. Fantastic game coming up there. But these guys have been playing too much. And we didn't see Hickman or Nembhard in the final 7 or 8 minutes of this game. Dusty, I know, checked out at the 5:22 mark. I noted that. And I think that Hickman and Nembhard came out shortly before that. So I think the last 6 minutes or so, but these guys also got big rest in the first half as well. And I think that's critically important for Gonzaga to give those guys a break. They cannot play 40 minutes every single night. We've talked about it extensively on this podcast. We've been calling for more opportunities for those guys when it is appropriate to get a break. That's why it was frustrating that Gonzaga wasn't able to give those guys a break in that game last week against Bakersfield. Of course, there was an illness going around. We found out about that later. Basically, many of the players on the team were sick. Mark Few was sick. We know Ben Gregg was sick. I suspect some of those guys who might have relieved Nembhard and Hickman in that game maybe weren't feeling so well for that contest as well. Perhaps part of the reason that didn't happen. But in this one, again, really good opportunity for these guys to take a break. I thought Nolan Hickman was excellent in this contest. He had 13 points, 5 assists, 3 boards, and a pair of steals. But the story about Gonzaga's guards, Nembhard and Hickman, is less about what they did on the floor and more about the amount of time they spent off of the floor. We usually do good and bad here. There wasn't a lot of bad things to talk about in this game, if we're being perfectly honest. I think the most nitpicky thing we can talk about is 15 turnovers, which is an abnormally high number. Now, this game was played at an incredibly frenetic pace on both sides. The amount of possessions both teams had was staggering. Usually, if you're going to score 111 points, you're going to end up with a lot of possessions. And so that's just going to lead to more turnovers. It's also worth acknowledging that many of these turnovers came in the last 5 minutes of the second half when the score was well decided. I mean, it was honestly, this game was over in the first 5 minutes, if we're being perfectly honest, but the majority of the turnovers came towards the end of the game. 3 of them were by Pavle Stosic. We'll talk more about him. 3 of them were by Luka Krajnovic. We'll talk about them, and one of them in particular coming up as well, but I'm not super concerned about those turnover numbers. I think that that's the kind of thing where if you didn't watch this game and you looked at the box score, there wouldn't be a whole lot to complain about perfectly, just looking at it. It's hard to find too many things to nitpick. But if anybody is looking at the box score and thinking, wow, 15 turnovers, that seems like they shouldn't be turning over the ball that much against this bad of a defense, I think that's a bit of a red herring stat. I don't think it really accurately describes the game. Yeah, there was a couple dumb turnovers again. We'll talk about one in particular, but I don't think it's something to really worry about or have any concern about going forward. Well, we saw a ton of Yeo, and we saw a ton of Krajnovic, and we saw some of Pavle Stosic. We saw the walk-ons. We got all sorts of information about guys who don't get to play for Gonzaga very often, and we're going to talk about what we saw, what it might mean for this team going forward, all coming up after a word from today's sponsor, JCE Medical. I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, but can we just talk for a minute about preparing for those real life things? Because according to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than getting sick while a supply chain issue keeps me or someone I loved from the life-saving medications that they needed. Thankfully, you can make it through because of JCE Medical. The JCE case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, among others. This stuff could happen to any of us. So visit JCE Medical and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It is never more important than now to be prepared. So go to jcemedical.com and use promo code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your first order. All right, folks. I want to thank all of you for making Locked On Zags your first listen or your first watch of the day as we get into more and more into the month of December leading up to this game against the University of Washington on Saturday. We got Mississippi Valley State early next week, and then the big one Friday, December 15th against the UConn Huskies. Some fantastic basketball coming up for the Zags. Again, make sure you're plugged into the show every single day to get what you need to know about this Gonzaga team in a 30-minute episode. Also, join us on our Discord channel. If you have not done so yet, if you want to talk Zags more than just 30 minutes a day here with me, you can join that Discord channel. We're talking 24/7 there. Going to review our 5 things to watch heading into this game here for Gonzaga. We talked about this every episode. Every game episode, we either do 5 keys to victory or 5 things to watch, depending on the quality of the opponent. In this case, it was more of like, hey, what are we going to be watching for in this game? It's not expected to be a close game, but what are the things we're hoping to see, wanting to see, expecting to see? And so we're going to go through those 5 things and talk about kind of how they played out in this game. The first thing was the hope that Gonzaga would be able to score 110 points. And I'm very glad I set it at 110 points instead of 120 points, which is what I was considering. I was considering trying to shoot for 120 points for Gonzaga. They wouldn't have gotten there, but they did make it to 110 points. They finished with 111 points, 59 at halftime. Just a fantastic all-around offensive performance from this team. Again, not playing a good program in Arkansas Pine Bluff defensively, and a team that likes to get out in transition. That led to Gonzaga took 79 field goal attempts, 79 field goal attempts. They made 45 of them. That's 57%. They were 10 of 24 from 3. That's 42%. They were 11 of 14 from the free throw line. That's 79%. 57, 42, 79 from the field goal, 3-point line, free throw line. Phenomenal offensive performance from the Zags. Not surprised they got to 110 in this one, but it's always good to see the offense chugging along like it was in this one. Key number 2 was lots of Luka Krajnovic. I copied this key over from last week in that Bakersfield game where, of course, we did not see any of Luka Krajnovic, and that was very much not the case in this game. Krajnovic came in early in the first half. He came in the middle of the second half. He played pretty much the entire second half of the second half in this game. As I'm recording this shortly after the game, the ESPN app has not updated the total number of minutes for each player, but I suspect Krajnovic was over 15 minutes, in that range at least, for Gonzaga. 7 points, 3 boards, 3 assists for him on 3 of 5 shooting. He had 4 very quick points. He basically scored 4 points in the first, I think, 2 minutes of being on the floor, and he would have played more minutes, except later in the first half, he had an opportunity for what looked like a pretty easy bucket. He tried to get fancy and make a Harlem Globetrotters-esque behind-the-back pass that sailed into the crowd, and he was very quickly yanked off the floor by Mark Few. Just one of those things you learn as a freshman. You don't do that in the Gonzaga program. There was a lot of conversation about it. I don't think it's that big of a deal. It's just a learning curve for a young player. You got to learn those kind of things. I thought I was glad to see Mark Few do that. He stuck to his kind of ground. I've seen him bench plenty of players in the past for doing this. I have a distinct memory of Gary Bell getting benched for trying to bounce a pass off the backboard to a teammate. I think Mark Few basically grabbed him and pulled him off the floor onto the bench. So this is not new. This is not cause for concern. This is not anything that's going to last beyond today as we're recording this shortly after the game. But it did cost Luka potentially the opportunity to play a few more minutes. But I liked what we saw from him for the most part. He had a really great play where he came down the floor. Braden Huff posted up for a 3. He dribbled past him, turned, and kind of shovel pass fed him for a wide open 3. Those were really just the kind of cerebral plays you like to see from a guy who you expect to eventually be able to play some point guard minutes in this program. He did have 3 turnovers. He did have some mistakes outside of just the obvious one that everybody saw. But I think that we're seeing a player who is developing, who is growing, who is finding his way in the system. He still hasn't played any minutes against really legitimate competition. And I'm not sure how many minutes he will play against super legitimate competition. I don't expect to see him against UConn or San Diego State or Kentucky later in the year, but I'm glad to see him getting a big run here because I think he needs it. And again, more importantly, the guards need a break. So you need to get Hickman and Nembhard some rest. You need to get Krajnovic some exposure, some experience to Division I basketball. This is a great opportunity to do both those things. And I'm glad it came together the way that it did. A lot of the same things can be said for Jun Seok Yeo as well. Yeo needs some exposure. He needs some playing time. Dusty Stromer needs some rest. And we saw that bear out immediately as Yeo was entered into the starting lineup. Caused a little bit of a panic for people for about 15 minutes, hoping everything was okay with Dusty. It turned out Dusty was just fine. He had 8 points, 4 boards, 4 assists in this one. But Yeo getting the opportunity to start. Now, he only played about 5 minutes before Stromer came in and replaced him. And in fact, Stromer did start the second half instead of Yeo. A bit odd to see that, but not anything that I would read too much into necessarily. Yeo didn't play particularly well in the first half. He only had 1 rebound and was 0 of 1 from the field in the first half. He did finish the game with 10 points, 4 rebounds, and 4 of 6 shooting, so he had a much stronger second half. He had his first field goal was on a fast break. He went through contact, brought the ball over to his left hand and finished. It was a really nice shot from him. I think we continue to see Yeo be a player who is great in transition. He is very strong, physical. He can out-athlete his opponents in a significant way. We've seen him look good defensively. He sometimes misses his assignments. He's sometimes a little out of position, but when he is on ball defense, when he is protecting the rim, again, the athleticism stands out in a way. But offensively, he's still just trying to find his rhythm. He's trying to find his flow. He takes shots in situations where maybe the offense didn't call for a shot. He rushes shots every once in a while. You're just seeing him not quite be familiar, comfortable with the system. And he doesn't have a lot of experience playing Division I basketball. He's been in practices, he's been around the team for a while, but it's different when you're out there playing in real games. And so I think he's just still finding a spot. I was really encouraged by what we saw from Yeo in this game, especially in the second half. And it's worth acknowledging a lot of that second half came against Ark Pine Bluff's backups. So, the 345th best team in the country playing their backup players, you want to take some of those results a bit with a grain of salt, but it was still good to see Yeo perform well in this game, have a strong second half, get into double figures for the first time in his Gonzaga basketball career. I think that'll be the first of many times that he's scoring in double figures for this team. One of our keys was to potentially see some of the 3 big lineups, something we've seen a handful of times this season already. I thought this might be a good opportunity to try out some of those 3 big lineups as a way to give the guards even more of a break. If you're playing, Ben Gregg, Graham Ike, and Anton Watson all at the same time, you can maybe slide Stromer to the 2 and bench one of the point guards. And we didn't see any of it. It never happened in this game. They didn't need to do it, and so they chose not to do it. I don't think that means much. I think it is. The 3 big lineup has always been something that is born out of necessity. Mark Few does not want to play 3 bigs at the same time. If he did, he would have done it many years ago when they had Kyle Wilcher and DeMontis Sabonis and Shemek Karnowski. He might have done it in that 16-17 season when they had Karnowski, Jonathan Williams, Killian Tilly, and Zach Collins, but he didn't do it in those seasons. He didn't do it when they had Chet and Timmy and Anton, I don't think. If he did it, it was very rare that happened with that team as well. He's playing 3 bigs this year in part because they need to at certain times because they just don't have the guard depth. In this game, when they didn't need to, they didn't do it. Wouldn't read into it any more than that. And then walk-on minutes. And I included Pavle Stosic in the walk-on minutes because I'm not really sure what his role is going to be. And Stosic ended up coming in the first half. He was the only one of these players who did play in the first half. He scored immediately when he came in the first half, didn't do much in the rest of the first half, and then played a huge chunk of the second half. I think he played about 10 minutes total, 5 in the first half, 5 in the second half. Finished the game with 4 points, 3 boards, and 3 turnovers. He was 2 of 2 from the field. He looks a little rough around the edges. Not shocking. He didn't come to the campus until late September. He's barely been here 2 months. It's a huge change, huge adjustment for him. We saw him make some careless passes. We saw him pass the ball to teammates who weren't looking. We saw him be surprised by catching some passes. But we also saw that he's a high-level athlete. He seems like he can jump out of the gym for somebody at his size at 6'9". He finished his 2 shots around the rim. My curiosity is whether he's going to redshirt. Him playing in this game is a decent indication that is probably not the case. He is allowed to play 4 games, and then if he sits out the rest of the season, he can redshirt. But you have to apply for a redshirt from the NCAA through a waiver, and they don't have to give it to you. And like if Stosic were to play the last 2 games of the season, if they all of a sudden played him in late February and then applied for a waiver, I can almost guarantee you he would not get it. That's not how it works. If he doesn't play for the rest of the season and they apply for a red shirt, he's going to get it. I almost guaranteed. But my guess is that if they wanted to redshirt him, they wouldn't be playing him. So I think there's a chance they're not planning to redshirt him. For whatever reason, I'm not sure. They obviously don't need any more help in the front court. But they are also somewhat short on bodies in general, so maybe they just want to keep him available. They don't have to make a decision on it right now. They didn't have to declare before the season that they're redshirting him. They can make that decision at any point. But I was intrigued to see him play because I'm curious just what kind of player he is, and I like getting to see him on the floor. But I'm also curious why he's playing and if that means that they're not going to redshirt him this year. We also saw about 5 minutes from each of Colby Brooks and Joe Few in this one. Colby had 3 points, 2 boards, and an assist. Joe had a pair of assists, did not score. Only player who played for Gonzaga who did not score, still has not had a field goal in a Gonzaga uniform. He has scored from the free throw line, but not from the field. He did have a lob to Colby Brooks that Brooks almost threw down. He ended up catching it and laying it in. So not quite an alley-oop from Joe, but still fun to see him get out there and do something pseudo-flashy, which I'm sure grinded his dad's gears a little bit on the sideline there. Moving away from this game, 2024 top prospect Isiah Harwell spoke about Gonzaga and his upcoming visit in February. Plus, the Zags offered a 4-star guard in the 2025 recruiting class. More on both of those things after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Folks, score early and score often this college basketball season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time than right now to get in on the action. The FanDuel app is very, very easy to use. There is a wide range of betting options, which include spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Right now, the Zags currently have 1,000-to-1 odds to make the Final Four. So if you're feeling spicy, if you're like, hey, man, they dropped 111 on Arkansas Pine Bluff, that means they're a Final Four team. You want to go drop $20, you could be $200 richer that third week in March if the Zags are still dancing. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today and kick off the college basketball season. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. All right, folks, closing out the show today with some recruiting updates. Been a while since we talked Zag recruiting on here. We got a couple stories here to monitor. First, we're talking Isiah Harwell. For those of you who are everyday listeners, longtime listeners of the show, we've talked about Isiah Harwell a handful of times. He has narrowed his list down to 9, which we already knew. But a recent article at Rivals.com interviewed Isiah Harwell, spoke to him about the schools he's contacted with, the schools he hasn't been in contact with, and got the general sense, according to their authors, that this is kind of a 2-team race. And Harwell made it clear that he has not made his decision. He has not started limiting teams or narrowing it down or anything like that. But the general consensus is that Harwell is down to North Carolina and Gonzaga. Harwell indicated in the article that North Carolina is his dream school. That is always a little tough to compete with in the recruiting sense. But Harwell is also from Pocatello, Idaho. He is currently playing at Wasatch Academy in Mount Pleasant, Utah, the same high school as current Gonzaga guard Nolan Hickman. So Gonzaga definitely has some advantages here. Again, 7 other schools theoretically in the mix. Those would be Baylor, Houston, Texas, UCLA, Cal, Bama, and Idaho State. Idaho State is where his father played, for what it is worth. But it sounds like this is coming down to Gonzaga and UNC. And again, the Rivals article indicated that Gonzaga might be able to pull away with their upcoming visit on February 3rd. Harwell's coming to Spokane to watch Gonzaga take on St. Mary's at the Kennel. Great opportunity for Harwell to see the place absolutely packed, see Gonzaga get a W against the Gales. Harwell spoke briefly about this upcoming visit with Rivals.com. He said, quote, "I just want to be more involved now on that second visit. I want to really hang out with the team more and see how they work." So this is his second visit to Spokane. He's hoping to get more intel, more insight, more familiarity with the team, with the players, with the program. It sounds like this is a really promising development. I know it's kind of a lot of speak about nothing. Nothing has really dramatically changed and won't until he takes that visit. But if this visit goes well, and he's been to Spokane twice, and he's taken the official visit, and the team has showed him around, done what they do on those recruiting visits, there's a real good chance that the Zags land this kid. And for those of you who need a refresh on who Harwell is, he is the number 8th ranked prospect right now in the class of 2024. He could reclassify to 2023. I've seen a lot of people talking about that. I'm not sure I see the appeal for Gonzaga, quite frankly. All of their guards can come back next year. I don't think Hickman or Nembhard are leaving. So Harwell reclassifying to then come off the bench doesn't make a lot of sense. I'd rather have him get here in 2024. It's, of course, up to him on what he wants to do there. Certainly, we would take him quite happily to show up in 2023 if that were the case. He's a 6'5" guard, again, with Wasatch Academy in Utah. Right now, on three is giving the Zags a 46.5% chance of landing him. They have UNC at 12.3%. No disrespect to on three in their predictor, but it's not particularly accurate. BYU is still on the list, and they are not even in Harwell's top 9 for what it is worth, but still exciting to see the Zags kind of being viewed as the potential favorites here for a top 10 prospect in that class. And then want to close out the show talking about a 2025 guard, Efeosa Oliogu, he's a 6'5" guard from Ontario. He plays for Overtime Elite, and he has been offered by Gonzaga. He's the 27th ranked player in the class of 2025, again, according to On3's composite rankings. On3 ranks him 24th, 24/7 Sports ranks him 30th, ESPN has him 43rd, and Rivals has him 30th. So lots of interest here in Efeosa. He has also received a bunch of offers, a whole bunch of offers. Providence, Mizzou, Maryland, Oregon, TCU, Alabama, Syracuse, Seton Hall, Georgetown, Illinois, Arizona State, Auburn, LSU, Texas Tech, and Mississippi State. That's not even all of them, folks. That's just a huge chunk of the schools that have made Efeosa an offer here. He has taken an official visit to Maryland. He is planning to take an official visit to both Auburn and Mizzou. And frankly, the Zags are pretty late to the party here. Late to the party in the sense that he already has visits scheduled. He's already taken visits. He's already got a bunch of offers. But this is a 2025 kid. So we're a ways away. The Zags may be late to the party, but none of the programs on that list are obvious, no doubt. Very few players pick Gonzaga over said school. They're not. Again, he took an official visit to Maryland. I think you'd rather go to Gonzaga than Maryland. Not, you don't know all the factors, certainly, but a kid from Canada, where Gonzaga has a very hearty pipeline, including the Nembhards, including Kelly Olynyk, including Kevin Pangos, including Rob Sacre. The list goes on. The Canadian pipeline is really strong for Gonzaga. We know that. So for him to get an offer from Gonzaga to consider a school that has this rich Canadian pipeline, that has a reputation for winning, that turns guards into NBA players the way they have, I think he's going to have to consider this. And I don't know his whole process here. I don't know how seriously he'll consider Gonzaga, but they have made him an offer, which means they've likely been in contact. They have watched him. They've scouted him. They've talked to him. They have this pipeline. They have this kind of setup. And I think that it's at least worth keeping an eye on. It seems like they might have got in too late. He might already have some schools in mind. He already might have some connections built with some other programs. Might not end up being a guy who comes to Gonzaga. But anytime they make an offer to somebody who's as ranked, as highly regarded as he is, again, top 30 prospect by basically every recruiting service in that 2025 class, 6'5" guard, long, really athletic guy playing for Overtime Elite, I think we got to keep an eye on him here, because this could be a really nice heist for Gonzaga if they're able to swoop in over a bunch of other Power 6 programs and woo him away from staying on the East Coast at a school like Maryland or Auburn or Missouri. All right, that's going to wrap us up for today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Don't forget to hit that like button, leave a comment, leave a review on iTunes. Join us on our Discord channel. Again, free to join. There's a link in the show notes. You can click on that there and hang out with us 24/7. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back later this week with more previews of that Washington game coming up on Saturday. Until then, as always, go Zags.